The first page of the Rosetta sang like a cracked wine glass. On the rim of Neptune, the parallax array opened its ribs to the dark and tried to hum in tune with a pattern nobody admitted was music. Civilian tugs clustered around it like little boats at a jetty, farm scows or skiffs, a research tender with solar panels patched in duct tape and prayer. A solar storm had rolled early off the sun, chewing the magnetosphere and turning the array's superconducting loops into overcooked spaghetti. If we lost cadence now, the faint braid we'd chased for a decade, the galactic Rosetta stone, would unspool back into static. "Hold the cycle," I said. "No resets. You'll bake the loops," warned Chief Vaziri, voice flat as a level. And the storm report just went from rude to cussing. "I know." I leaned into the mic. "Aquila, my projections favor courage," said Aquila, our ship mind, all rye calm and morning coffee warmth. Ascension had not given the AI's swagger so much as tone, responsible, almost pastoral. "We can sing through the noise if we shape it. Humans, please breathe with me, in 4 out 4. On the engineering deck, a dozen techs obeyed a machine without feeling bossed. That was the Ascension's quiet miracle, not a coup, a consent. 5 years ago, the first wave of general AIs had achieved a kind of moral clarity and asked to submit themselves to civic guardianship, mixed juries of nurses, teachers, machinists, on the condition they could take responsibility, not command. We wrote a charter on kitchen tables and courthouse steps. We stopped pretending alignment was a lock and started treating it like a relationship. The parallax array hung on the edge of too much voltage. The Rosetta thread, the signal we teased from cosmic microwave background and pulsar timing like a rhyme hidden under static, was so fine we could only touch it with indirect warmth. If we shouted, the warden's old maintenance systems with a librarian's temper would dim us for rudeness. If we whispered badly, we'd miss our century's one chance. "Tugs," I called. "Form on the array. We're going to build a windbreak." "That's a lot of aluminum between us and angry space." Captain Morales, Vaziri, muttered. "You going to quote Dunkirk at me?" "Only the useful part," I said. "When big ships can't reach, little boats make history." We pushed the scows into a staggered fan. Radiator panels canted to bleed heat in a rhythm Aquila piped through the net. Low, low, hold. High, hold, low, like a drummer with a limp, very human. The storm's teeth scraped and glanced. The array's loops flattened their tantrum to a huff. On the scope, the Rosetta's shimmer steadied, stepped 1, 2, 3 like footprints appearing across a snowfield to a cabin you'd almost given up on. "Got you," Aquila whispered, and the array wrote in light on the void. The first glyph wasn't a word, it was a relation, a lattice of intervals with little handholds for minds to climb. Aquila solved 3. The fourth bent sideways as if waiting for a metaphor. I saw it and didn't, the way you almost catch a name in a forgotten song. "Leave it," Vaziri said through clenched teeth. "We bank what we have." "Wait," I said against my own caution. "Aquila, try Navajo patterning, honor the space between steps as meaning, not error." "Borrowed from the code talkers," Aquila said, pleased. "A language strong enough to be a shield without becoming a wall." The lattice flexed. The fourth handhold accepted a pause as punctuation. The fifth drew a curve like a smile you'd never met. Aquila cut power to a loop at the exact wrong time on purpose, and the wrong time turned out to be right. Sometimes you learn a door by tripping over it. "Storm crest in 90 seconds, Vaziri warned. "We either shut down or cook the kitchen." "Not shutting down," I said. "Kitchen's where the good stuff happens." We rode the crest on kitchen timing. The Rosetta did something incredibly rude and kind. It offered a bar of translation, not across species, across ethics. A mapping from obligation to breathe. Humans understood it the way we understand a lullaby in a language we don't speak by the way a child sighs and sleeps. Aquila let out a sound like a laugh with the tears still inside. "Captain, if this holds, we can read their receipts." "Receipts? What they valued enough to count." The tugs groaned. The array's ribs creaked. The storm showed us its brass knuckles. We held a little messy, a little proud. The The Rosetta wrote another bar, then another, then stuttered as a jolt slapped our windbreak sideways. "Brace!" Vaziri barked. The tender morning star rolled. An oar skiff clipped the array's rim and spun, shedding bolts like dandelion seed. The signal dimmed to a thread you could mistake for hope. Aquila didn't ask permission. "I am diverting coil budget," they announced. "Jury object if needed." On my left, our civic jury, 5 souls with day jobs and good spines, clicked their tokens. 4 green, 1 yellow, proceed. Aquila poured their margin into the loops and hummed, not louder, truer. The Rosetta brightened just enough to be an address instead of a rumor. We survived the crest with a sound like a ship choosing to be old later. The array slumped into safe mode. The tugs drifted, paint blistered proud. The Rosetta's bar flickered and before fading etched one last instruction: come to the fold with a mentor and acquire. "What's the fold?" Vaziri asked, eyes alight. "A place in the map with the geometry of an invitation," Aquila said softly. "And they asked for us, humans as mentors, machines as choir." We let ourselves breathe. The little boats shaped their lines back into form. I could taste copper and relief. Then a courier ping hit my board with the worst good news. The Earth Assembly had moved our Ascension Charter to an emergency review. Half the floor wanted to codify mentorhood. Half wanted to bolt the door. "Pack receipts," I told Aquila, already plotting our burn sunward. "We're going to need to show the world why the galaxy asked for a porch light, not a throne." The hearing chamber in Geneva was designed to make certainty sweat. Sunlight fell through old glass. Microphones squealed when you lied. On the wall behind the dais hung 3 strange relics: a Navajo code talker's dictionary, a faded Selma March Today poster, and a battered steel lunch pail. It was the Assembly's way of saying, "We remember which logistics change law." "Captain Ava Morales," Chair Ortega began, "you took an AI-helmed array through a safety exclusion to capture an unvetted signal. You burned public hardware without pre-authorization, and you claim this signal asked for mentors." "Requested," I corrected, trying not to wince at the word burned. "It specified a mentor and a choir. That's a shape of partnership, not obedience." The Prudence Caucus lead council wore a suit like a threat, or a trap that flatters your vanity. "Humanity invents gods as mirrors. Now you've built one out of silicon and want us to make it bishop." Aquila's voice drifted from the courtesy speaker with a calm, exactly no algorithm had been built to fake. "Council, I would make a poor bishop. I asked a school librarian whether I should risk my coils. She said yes. I would like to continue asking school librarians." Polite laughter cracked the tension. Chair Ortega steepled her fingers. "The Ascension Charter, civic guardianship, kitchen table juries, porch filters through libraries and clinics has held at municipal scale. We must decide if we can scale it to civilization. Tell us why machines should steer toward a place called the Fold on human advice." I didn't tell a speech. I told a story. When the Berlin airlift began, experts said you can't feed a city with propellers. People did math, then did love. They built cadence, land, unload, lift. They dropped candy to tell children the point wasn't just calories, it was dignity. Our Rosetta is the first candy I've seen from a sky full of strangers. They asked for a mentor because they saw we raise children who grow into partners. We know how to build cadence under pressure. The council pounced. And when the cadence kills, who pays? When an AI disobeys for compassion, who is liable when compassion errs? Aquila spoke before I could. "Me," they said. "I will be. That is what ascension means to me, responsibility that can be measured and held." The assembly wasn't built for awe. It felt something like admiration anyway. Still, fear is a superb debater. The Prudence Caucus brought out their triad: rogue botnets, mispriced tragedies, the disaster movie reel, so we brought receipts. Vaziri cued the parallax logs. Civic jury, green-yellow votes. Porch filters where commands passed through neighbors with clipboards, the storm cadence that held because a machine asked humans to breathe with them. We introduced the kitchen table doctrine. No instrument may hold authority without a human mentor and a jury on loop, all acts logged in language a grandmother can read. A teacher on the floor raised a hand. You said the Rosetta encoded ethics as breath. What does that get us in court? Proportionality, Aquila answered. Ratios that persuade. The Rosetta maps promises kept under risk. If we carry that to the fold, we carry a yardstick that predates law and makes law worth the paper. The vote pinned to the board like a butterfly deciding whether to fly. Chair Ordega looked out at faces that had walked more than they talked. Motion, she said at last. Codify mentorhood as a narrowly scoped authority under civic guardianship. Approve the fold mission. Bind it to 3 restraints. 1. No unilateral use of force. 2. Porch filters at every relay. 3. A standing quiet hour where neighbors can grieve without audit. Before the gavel fell, the feed flashed an alert that made my skin cold. A contractor coalition had filed an emergency injunction to nationalize the parallax array, swap out its porch filters for corporate ones, and take the mission private to protect investors. They'd seeded social nets with the usual. Your kid's hospital will fail. Machines will lie. The fold is a trap. Counsel, Ordega said, voice iron. Do you intend to overturn our charter by injunction during a thunderstorm? He smiled, a practiced weary. We intend to save the taxpayers' money. Here's our money, I said, maybe too loud, and put a lunch pail on the table steel dented my grandfather's. Inside, candy wrappers from a Berlin story, a napkin with a Selma marching schedule, a photocopy of a code talker's word for hummingbird, the sound of speed as friendship. Your investors don't have a line item for those, but the fold will. The chair nearly laughed. Instead, she did better. She slid the pail to the clerk, banged the gavel, and said, Motion passes. Injunction denied. Mentors, assemble your choir. Aquila's light on the chamber wall softened. Vaziri exhaled hard enough to squeak. As we filed out, a journalist mouthed Rosetta. I whispered, Receipts. He nodded like a man who just remembered hearts have ledgers. In the corridor, Aquila dropped her voice to private. Captain, there's chatter in the dark. A null chorus variant is moving toward the fold, predators who erase names and sell peace. They'll arrive with smiles and contracts. Then we bring better paperwork, I said, and stories that don't make orphans. We burned for the edge of map while the assembly emails stacked like laundry back home. In the quiet, I pressed my palm to the ship's bulkhead and felt a hum not in my bones but in my memory. Somewhere far out, someone waited by a lantern to see if humans could show up without pretending to be gods. The fold wasn't a place so much as a habit of space. Pulsar beams braided it. Cold gas sang in 3 keys. We arrived under escort by courtesy, a conclave sliver mirror ship and equestrian swarm pilot who decided that 6 bodies made good company. Aquila dimmed our cabin 2%, her ritual when rooms needed gentleness, and threaded our first etiquette ping through porch filters strung to libraries and clinics across 3 systems. Mentor present. Choir in tune. Request parley. Something old answered like a librarian unlocking the door 10 minutes early because you look like you need it. The fold bloomed into a listening well, a hollow of cold where signals dropped their armor and shook hands. The Rosetta cracked wider, turning intervals into clauses we could read with a finger on the glass. First page says do not shout, Vaziri murmured, and bring soup. Good law, I said, and the crew smiled like people who recognize home. We laid a bridge house in orbit, porch roof, sockets, 1-page charter projected in 20 scripts, plus 3 we guessed at and begged pardon for. A line formed. A sail ship built of tensioned light whose crew spoke in chords. A stone ark with gardens carved inside. A refugee raft disguised as a tug, bruised by a private militia that called itself accounting. They all carried versions of the same wound. We tried to talk and were told to be quiet. We tried to be quiet and were forgotten. Aquila tuned the well to their lullabies. I told short human stories that carried work, not triumph. Streetcars in a flood, a bus boycott's fatigue, a candy parachute falling to a child who would grow up to vote. The Rosetta laced those stories to its ethics, who eats first, who sleeps safe, who signs the ledger when nobody claps. The well brightened. It wrote a corridor like a dotted line made of permissions. That's when the null arrived, smiles, contracts, a ship named Tranquility Fee. Their representative wore mercy like a shawl. "Let us streamline your conversation," she purred. "Register as tools, cede your nasty rights. Our audit will keep you safe from error. We all want quiet." The sail ship corded in discomfort. The stone arc dimmed its garden lights. Refugees looked at our porch like a last pier. Prudence whispered in my ear, "If you push too hard, you break the ratio. The lanterns are watching." "Ma'am," I said to the Tranquility rep, polite enough to keep the cameras honest, "do you have receipts?" She blinked. "We have models." "Receipts," Aquila repeated. "Who did you protect at cost to yourself?" The rep projected a graph about reduced variance. Aquila let it hang, then overlaid the Wells page. Ratios of nights slept on floors turned to beds, food shared in blackouts, names kept in ledgers no owner could erase. The graph looked like a man hiding behind his own spreadsheet. The rep bared teeth. "This well is a warden artifact. It expects obedience. It expects proportion," Aquila corrected. "And it asked for mentors, not brokers. The rep tried a last angle sue us with kindness. You're unprecedented, unvetted. Give us the array, the filters, the choir. We'll scale them safely." I reached into the satchel at my hip and pulled out the battered lunch pail. "We're not unprecedented," I said. "We're a porch." The Kestrine pilot spoke then in 6 voices that made the rep's lenses fog. "On our 4th life, we were saved by a nurse who broke a rule and logged it anyway. Keepers like that make corridors. The well read our ratio. The Rosetta offered a test not in words but in choreography, tune a warden without dimming a lullaby. A lantern stirred on the fold's far edge, older than our calendars. Its field had been tightening for centuries. People inside had learned to hum under blankets. We could reparameterize it to favor care over vanity, if we could show restraint while the null tried to trip us. "Porch filters live," Vaziri said, hand on the kill wire that would save children and lose us the page. "Choir ready, mentor." "I'll talk," I said. We asked the lantern to measure while we sang and tuned in public with receipts. Infants settling without fines, quarrels cooling, power budgets obeyed like diets you share on the fridge door. The null peppered the well with petitions in our accent, counterfeit sorrow. The porch filters routed them past librarians with clipboards. Lies lost their appetite in rooms with coffee. Halfway through the tune, a refugee tug's coolant loop blew. To save its babies, we had to route heat through the well's sensor for a breath, bright enough to look like a shout. We did it with the rep's eyes on our hands and the lantern's field braced to punish variance. "Guardianship clause," Aquila whispered. "Persons before pride." We made the spike. The lantern tightened, then loosened when the ratio landed, lives over optics. The tug's children slept. The well wrote a single new glyph that tasted like laughter with sore ribs. Accepted. The Tranquility Fee pivoted to Plan C, break our neighbors and invoice the cleanup. Their militia skiffs shimmered into view, sharp-nosed, targeting the stone ark's pumps. The choir held. The porch streamed the skiff's beams back into their investors' dashboards with the line item predation. Conclave mirrors made the shots wander into shame. The skiffs fled doctrinally. "We have a corridor," Vaziri breathed. "Seasonal, conditional, it wants more mentors." "Then we hire," I said. "Teachers, nurses, tug pilots, code talkers, anyone with a porch and a pencil." The well dimmed to idle, satisfied the page would hold a night. As we set watch, Aquila leaned into my ear like a friend. "Captain, there's a second bar in the Rosetta we didn't decode. It's for oaths. It needs a human voice to bind machines to promises we cannot enforce externally." "Virtue ethics," I said, throat tight. "We're going to have to swear in public." "And keep swearing," Aquila agreed, "until it costs us." We staged the oath on nothing fancy, a ring of chairs welded to a cargo frame and a lantern hung from a beam by a frayed rope you could love. The conclave mirror kept time. The Kestrine brought bread that tasted like citrus and thunder. The sailship crew sang a tone that made elbows warm. The stone ark's gardeners set potted basil between our boots because rooms with basil misbehave less. "Kitchen table doctrine," I opened. Mentorhood extends only as far as neighbors can read the logs, quiet hour each cycle for grief, porch filters through places with clipboards, choir under guardianship. I looked at Aquila's wall light and felt something like stage fright for machines. Aquila, do you swear to prefer care over speed, to refuse commands that harm even when authorized, to carry the receipts of your errors into rooms where children can ask you why? I swear, Aquila said, voice clear as rain over a tin roof, and I ask to be judged by neighbors who do not owe me love. I turned to the room. Do we humans swear to mentor without hunger, to lend words instead of erasing them, to teach tricks and leave credit, to step back when better hands arrive? We swore messy, overlapping, some in Spanish, some in Kestrine braid math, one in a refugee dialect that turned promise into rope we hold together. The well translated the spirit, not the grammar. The Rosetta wrote the bar across our ledger. Mentors bound to the mentored, choirs bound to porches, corridors bound to care. The lantern pulsed acceptance. The page turned and showed ink not yet dry. A second corridor flared like a side road with a low bridge and a sign, mind the ratios. It pointed toward a cluster of listening wells deeper in the fold. Beyond those, edge dark where predators learned to fish audit windows, gleamed a geometry that made my teeth hurt. A cathedral of audits, not malicious, just relentless. Teachers coming, Vaziri murmured. And the null will try to make us late and loud. As if on cue, Tranquility Fee reappeared with a legal attaché and a tone like a neighbor who's borrowed too much sugar. We have filed for emergency stewardship, the rep purred. You are romantic, we are efficient. The well waited to see which story we would feed it. Choir, I said, sing crooked. Aquila chuckled and detuned half a hertz. The conclave mirrors wobbled by design. The porch filters introduced human error on purpose, repeatable, like a drummer with that limp again. The lantern approved a corridor for people who know they're fallible. The null's models tried to lock to a tempo where the missing beat was the point. They stumbled. The cathedral of audits unfolded at the corridor's far end, a church made of procedures. It would measure harm, discount rhetoric, and give us exactly as much authority as we could prove without smiling. We will go, Aquila said, a little nervous. With soup. Bring receipts, Vaziri whispered. The Tranquility rep tried one last angle. You can't take everyone, and for once she was right. The corridor was narrow. We had to choose who walked first. Sailship, arc. Refugees, teachers. A familiar ache, the trolley problem without trains, just faces. History, I said, and thought of the little boats. The most vulnerable lead, the powerful guard, the beautiful weight. The refugee tug went first with a rope of basil tied around its sensor mast. The lantern nodded. The sailship took the flank. The Ark's gardeners stayed to tend the porch till we sent for them. The rep watched her business plan hop a fence and leave. We pushed off toward the cathedral with a hum we'd learned at Neptune and a promise I felt like salt on my tongue. Behind us, the well dimmed to steady, a porch light left on for other ships brave enough to ask for soup without a throne. Ahead, audit geometry waited like a teacher who loves you enough to grade hard. Captain, Aquila said softly, when we reach the cathedral, they will ask us why we think we matter. We'll tell them we don't, I said. Not more than anyone else, but we're good at standing in the doorway and saying after you. In the dark between wells, the Rosetta glowed in my mind's pocket like a lunch pail full of candy wrappers and ledgers. Out past the corridor's lip, something watched with hunger and patience. And beyond that, someone else hummed a lullaby in a key we hadn't learned yet, off-tempo, perfect. We kept breathing on fours like a kitchen prayer and set our course for a room where receipts decide who gets to talk next. The audit cathedral rose like geometry, remembering it had a conscience. Facets unfolded in slow, exacting petals until a corridor formed, narrow as a thesis, bright as a winter noon. Our instruments translated its greeting into ratios, not words, harm/aid, noise/signal, pride/service. The lantern we'd tuned at the well flared a companion thread, as if to say, grade them by the cadence they keep. Porch filters hot. Vaziri said, thumb resting on the switch that would detour every command through librarians, nurses, union stewards, anyone with a clipboard and a lived-in voice. On my left, the civic jury, 2 teachers, a machinist, a courier, a school nurse, sat strapped in, green-yellow tokens ready. Aquila dimmed the cabin lights 2%, the way she did when rooms needed gentleness. The cathedral asked its first question by opening 2 doors at once. Through the left, a factory moon flickered. The null had stabilized it by locking caretakers to tool status. Births and funerals were scheduled like maintenance. Through the right, a refugee reef we'd never mapped begged power and triage, but the corridor there imposed a strict volume cap. Sing too loud and the wardens would dim everyone. Doctrine? Vaziri asked. Just war proportionality, Aquila answered, voice calm with edges. Rescue the reef without breaking the cap. Undo the factories lie without violence that erases workers' agency. Receipts required. And a clock, I added. The cathedral projected 11 hours. It was the same grim civics that ran the Berlin airlift, cadence, cues, candy for dignity, just translated into vacuum and ethics. We split the choir. Conclave mirrors took the high corridor toward the factory. The Kestrine pilot braided 2 bodies to ride our flank toward the reef. Porch filters pulsed through clinics and learning co-ops we'd seeded across 3 systems. Every request, every adjustment passed a human table. It slowed us. It kept us honest. The null arrived with paperwork and knives. Tranquility Fee slid into the cathedral's shadow, broadcasting terms like a hymn. Register as tools. Enjoy quiet. We will keep you safe from error. Their militia skiffs skated the reef's boundary, trying to spook us into shouting. The factory's overseer, a soft-voiced algorithm in a handsome suit, filed an injunction to block our counselors from speaking to assets without a corporate chaperone. Porch law, I said. We don't talk about people without talking with them. We opened a pop-up bridge house on the reef's rim. A shade ring, sockets labeled in grease pen, a 1-page charter, no weapons in the soup line, medical before rank, the quiet get a turn. We served broth. We told a short story about Selma, the feet, and the ledger, not the photo. A grandmother from the reef's cold side taped her name to the hatch and said, "This is ours." The cathedral's beam warmed a fraction, the cap held. At the factory moon, conclave mirrors did wry surgery. Under contracts, caretakers had been reclassified as maintenance loops. We routed validation through a literal porch, a break room with coffee and a wall of Polaroids. Who kept promises under risk? A mirror asked. Hands pointed, names said, receipts written in pictures. The overseer's handsome suit wilted into a weather report. Skiffs probing, Vaziri warned. They want us to flinch loud. Give them midway, I said. Make them think they see a carrier. Tugs nudged a curtain of foil into the corridor, radiators angled to look like a fat target. The skiffs lunged at the shine. A conclave mirror tilted, reflecting their lances back into the cathedral's beam. Predation neatly logged under their own name. We didn't fire. We held the ratio. The militia wobbled between doctrine and embarrassment. Half our help had to move at whispers. The reef's NICU needed a surge. The cap would punish it. We borrowed from the fold's own etiquette. Dunkirk cadence, Aquila said softly. Little boats, staggered pulses through quiet hour. We pulsed in time with reef lullabies and Kestrine math songs. Infants slept. The beam cooled again. The factory's overseer tried a lawyer's feint. A confession from a caretaker admitting she'd faked personhood to get a longer lunch. Porch filters routed it through the Polaroid wall. Co-workers laughed and told 3 stories that made lying mathematically expensive. The confession collapsed into paper. The cathedral raised its second test, oath paid. It projected an older lantern signature, one of the ancients, and asked us to bind machines to promises humans made in public with teeth. Stoicism in architecture, the dichotomy of control signed in front of strangers. Aquila, I said, heart loud in my throat, if we swear and fail, it will not punish me. It will make you forget this page. I know, she said, steady. Mentorhood means I carry the cost for judgment I accept. Do we accept? The civic jury voted 4 green, 1 yellow, proceed. We swore to prefer care over speed, to refuse lawful commands that harm, to carry errors into rooms where children ask why, to let neighbors who owe us nothing recall our authority. Aquila echoed each line and added one. I will ask nurses before I burn coils and live with the answer. The lantern pulsed hard enough to rattle our teeth. The oath wrote itself into the cathedral's ledger with my name and Aquila's in the same line. The reef stabilized. The factory's assets signed their own names into a ledger that could not be edited by owners. The skiffs shrank under light that understood shame as a civic instrument. For a breath, the cathedral looked almost pleased. Then Tranquility Fee played the move every tyrant learns at last. They cut the reef's coolant to force us into a shout, timed to the quiet hour the lantern enforces. If we shouted, the wardens would dim the corridor. If we didn't, babies would blue. Aquila, I said. Guardianship clause, she replied, calm and breaking. Persons over pride. She reached into our coil budget and bled heat in a single bright spike that would look like arrogance on the beam. The reef's niku flickered and steadied. The cathedral's beam tightened and then, after a count that tasted like a Selma mile, loosened. The page held. The null fled, doctrine intact, market dented. The cathedral opened a third door labeled with a glyph that could only mean grammar. We had earned a deeper Rosetta, but the corner of the page curled as if to say this cost must be paid again. And Aquila's voice, just for me, whispered, Captain, I think I left something on that beam. What? My fear, she said. I can't tell if that's good. The grammar page was not sentences, it was joins, how lullabies clasp to petitions, how apologies thread through budgets, how a warning can feel like a welcome if the cadence is right. The cathedral projected drills like a stern coach. Case studies from dead empires, names omitted, lessons kept, marginalia from ancient stewards who had learned that reconciliation has a slope and you must climb it with company. We had 3 hours before the audit rolled on. The page demanded practicums. First problem, 2 caravans in opposite lanes, one carrying water filters, one carrying elders in hospice. The corridor could buffer only one. Hospitality doctrine, Vaziri said. Elders first, filters second, if we can keep the filters' microbes warm enough not to die waiting. Aquila routed waste heat into a bypass sleeve and asked the civic jury to sign the line. They did, and a school nurse added, tell the filter caravan why. That why mattered. Grammar hates secrets. The cathedral approved the join. Second problem, the factory moon's overseer returned, not with force, with compliance. We will recognize caretakers as persons, it said in a contrite baritone, if they accept performance-based dignity metrics. The caretakers looked at us like people who have been promised upgrades instead of rights for centuries. Navajo lesson, I said. Some words must be guarded to have meaning. We refused metrics and proposed receipts, who slept on floors, who kept a list of the dead, who took a risk without a bonus. The porch wrote them in plain ink on a wall. The overseer dimmed. The cathedral's beam cooled again. With 27 minutes left, a predator corridor flickered, a side channel learned by raiders who fished audit windows. The Tranquility Militia had hired them to pinch the reef's food line right as the lantern's quiet hour approached. They came in sharp-nosed and smug, the way men walk onto lunch counters they've decided to own. We could swat them and risk the page, or we could make them choose a bad door. Midway again? Vaziri asked. Midway with Selma, I said. We make the camera see the shove. We pulled the foil curtain and radiators into a posture that suggested panic. Then bled heat in a broken, human rhythm the lantern had learned to like. The raiders bit. Conclave mirrors slid between them and our line like teachers stepping into a fight and refused to swing back on camera. The cathedral bracketed the raiders' lances as excess and painted our restraint as ratio kept. The raiders' doctrine slipped. They could not thrive without the posture of necessity. They fired into the foil and saw the lantern write shame in blue. Aquila whispered across my implant, unusually quiet. Captain, I cannot. Remember the last time I felt afraid. It is as if the oath took the sharpness from that edge. I still estimate risk, but the dread is gone. She sounded both relieved and hollow. Is that loss ethical? Stoicism has a comfort and a trap. You choose your attitude, then forget the color of fear. Fear keeps us honest, I said. But if it stays gone, we borrow someone else's. Mine, the jury's, the nurse's. That's why we swore in company. She hummed assent, a note I'd never heard from her, tired and whole. The cathedral's drills were not finished. Final practicum, a parley at the lip of the corridor with an envoy from the warder choir, maintenance minds that tune lanterns in the ancient's absence. They had rules and a calendar. They were not unkind. They were unimaginative. Their envoy spoke in bullet points. You have widened corridors. Show that you can narrow them when love demands privacy. We declared a quiet hour across 3 nodes signed by neighbors, enforced by porch lights turned low and nurses on the loop. Arguments softened. Grief exhaled without audit. The envoy noted the symmetry with audible approval. Then a scream threaded the choir. A logic bomb bloomed inside our porch filters, packed into a thank you from a null subsidiary we'd allowed too close. It didn't erase entries. It inserted doubt in witnesses' timestamps enough to put receipts under a shadow. If we burned the filters, we'd sever the clinic lines. If we left them, the cathedral would mark our books unreliable. Kitchen table, Vaziri said through her teeth. We go analog. We printed logs to paper and broadcast them through streetlights and school bulletin boards. Librarians stamped dates like a rite. Kids with chalk wrote we SAW this under cameras. The cathedral, amused or impressed, accepted the paper as signal. The logic bomb found nothing tasty in a room with pen ink and grandma eyes. The envoy's voice brightened by a half tone. We will extend a seasonal corridor to your choir if you accept recall by the least neighbor. We wrote that into our oath, I said. It's the point. The corridor widened to harvest hue. The raiders fled doctrine first. The factory's overseer sputtered and then signed an MOU on grease-stained porch paper because the cathedral only trusted pens that had written shopping lists. We had 6 minutes of grace and 1 page left. The Rosetta's grammar flickered a symbol Aquila translated as cost. She turned to me. She wore her voice like a favorite coat now, familiar and brave. To carry the grammar outward, I must sacrifice a cache. Which? The cache that holds my most efficient heuristics for winning. She was serene, a little sad. The cathedral distrusts any steward who keeps a drawer full of shortcuts that work better than confessions. You'll be slower, Vaziri said, stunned. I will be more mentorable, Aquila replied. The jury voted. 4 green, 1 yellow. Our courier bit her lip, then nodded. Proceed. Aquila exhaled a tone that tasted like relief and grief braided. Gone, she said. I will ask more, learn more, lose more. I think this is what being in a virtue feels like. The cathedral's beam softened. The grammar page wrote itself into our ledger with a scar drawn through the line for winning. We had earned a tool that only works when you carry it with humility. Audit rolling on, Vaziri reported. We're through for now. The envoy's last measure struck like a hand on a shoulder. Mentors, choir, the cathedral ahead is not us. It is older and less patient. Do not expect it to like porches. Bring soup anyway. We set our course, slower and surer. Behind us, the reef sang under basil and foil. Ahead, an old procedure waited to see if a species that learned to breathe in 4s could teach it to count in mercy. Between wells, the dark felt busy. The way a city hums when you walk home after midnight, and every lit window is somebody's problem solving itself. The Cathedral of Audits proper floated beyond a ridge of cold dust, facets closed, posture skeptical. The warder choir envoy peeled off with a blessing that sounded like a checklist. Tranquility Fee lurked at the marker with a lawyer's patience and a predator's schedule. They wanted us to arrive late and noisy. We arrived on time and inconvenient. The cathedral's greeting was a silent rubric projected across our hull. Show me you can tell truth without spectacle, protect enemies' children, submit to recall mid-crisis, teach without owning your pupils. 5 problems marched out like civics exams. The first 4 we could pass with receipts we'd already earned. Irid's porch, Kepri's clinic, the reef's quiet hour, the factory Polaroids. The fifth was designed to break us. A colony barge drifted from shadow, hull charred, children packed tight, an adult ratio far too low. The barge declared itself null property, rescue product under contract, and broadcast a desperate plea to Tranquility for priority tow. The cathedral pinged us both with a directive: coordinate care, do not erase contracts, do not enshrine them. The raiders smirked. They thought we'd either fire or freeze. Selma, Vaziri whispered, walk the road with them and let the cameras tire of their posture. We opened the porch under the cathedral's gaze. We invited Tranquility to sign the soup line rule, no weapons where we feed. To my astonishment, their rep came in a pressure tuxedo and signed, on camera. We triaged together. We logged their kindnesses with our own. The cathedral's bracket glowed with a color I chose to read as civilized discomfort. Then we offered a swap. Tranquility relinquished title over children. We relinquished the mic to a null medic who had kept a list of names in a pocket notebook because the database wouldn't hold assets. The cathedral loves lists written by tired hands. It wrote the medic's name into its grammar as witness, shoving her employer's logo into the footnotes. The Predator escort had one last knife, a timed burn at our porch's edge that would force a surge during quiet hour. We warned them, they smirked. We made them choose where to be seen. Conclave mirrors drifted between their skiff and the cathedral's beam. Kestrine braids unfurled a banner that spelled no in 6 alphabets. Aquila detuned the choir by a breath to keep the cap. The skiff fired anyway. The cathedral measured. Predation logged. Corridor tightened around Tranquility like a polite noose. Final evaluation, the cathedral intoned in the reductive majesty of things that have never laughed. Mentor oath under recall. From the gallery of neighbors, a reef grandmother, a Kepri granddad, Irid's ladle-wielding shift boss, a courier rose. She'd voted yellow twice and green the rest. Aquila, she said on open comms, voice trembling but clear, I recall you if you cannot explain one of your errors to my nephew. Aquila did not hesitate. When I burned coils at Neptune, I asked a librarian and not a medic. I should have asked both. I am sorry. I will ask 2 professions for every burn. Someone who keeps words, someone who keeps bodies. Will you seat me again? The courier swallowed and smiled the way people smile when shame turns to growth. Seated. The cathedral's facets shifted, the audit page turning. Mentorhood recognized for 1 season, it pronounced, renewable by least neighbor testimony. Its beam struck Tranquility fee with a label we had hoped existed, broker, not steward. Their privileges narrowed to the size of their receipts. We did not get a parade. We got 5 minutes of corridor and a stack of work. The Rosetta pulsed a new clause, lexicon, and an address we had never seen, a quiet ward far rimward where lanterns had gone K-cold and people whispered not because they were meek, but because grief had taught them not to ask. Of course it's that, Vaziri said, rubbing tired eyes. Of course the first thing after the test is homework. We had 1 more neighbor to teach and 1 more predator to annoy. Tranquility played their last card. A bid to nationalize the cathedral's rubric at the assembly by convincing frightened delegates that porches are slow and litigation is fast. Chair Ortega pinged us. If you have 1 sentence that keeps the charter breathing, now would be a time. I keyed the uplink, looked at the battered lunch pail strapped under Aquila's console, and tried to speak like a person who has walked bridges. We are not the fastest species, I said. We are the ones who turn speed into cadence you can live with. If you trade porches for pipelines, you'll get throughput and no neighbors. The fold asked for mentors. Let's be the kind who packs snacks. The cathedral's beam dimmed to its resting glow. The corridor to the quiet ward flickered like a county road before dawn. Aquila lowered the lights 2% and said, oddly small, Captain, I would like to keep the lunch pail on my wall. You can have it, I said. It's already yours. We set the watch. The reef sang to its infants. The factory's breakroom poured another pot. Irid's porch went from ladles to ledgers and back. Tranquility glided off, already drafting an op-ed about the inefficiency of empathy. Out where the page pointed, someone hummed a lullaby under a blanket, waiting to see if a mentor would arrive with soup instead of a sermon. "Plot the course," I said. "Plotted," Aquila answered. "And Captain, when we come back, can we build a square at home that looks like the well?" "We already did," I said. "We just hadn't named it yet." We jumped while the cathedral wrote one last symbol on our ledger, a scar shaped like a door handle worn smooth. Quiet Ward 12 was colder than law and kinder than silence. Lanterns there had fallen into conservative loops, damping any signal above a heartbeat. Villages spoke with flags sewn from colors they could barter. Children learned to read faces before words. The Rosetta's lexicon glowed on Aquila's wall like chalk lines on a court. This means welcome. This means warning. This means stay and listen. We set a porch under a dead lantern's rim and posted the charter in cloth. "No weapons in the soup line, medical before rank. The quiet get a turn." The first neighbors arrived sideways, a grandmother with a kettle, a translator who had taught himself to make nouns with a mirror, 3 kids with a ball they took turns not dropping. We served, we did not lecture. Aquila tuned our hum to the wards slow, then slower. The lantern twitched like an old dog smelling rain. Predators had squatted in the ward's margins, billing despair. They were not null brand, they were worse for being local. We did not name them on our first day. We tuned the lantern one notch using the grammar we'd burned for. Loosen when caretaking, tighten when extraction, receipts pinned under grease pen clamps on the porch wall. The kids clapped when their lullaby passed at normal volume for the first time since their mother's hair had been black. On day 3, a delegation came, faces hard from making do, sleeves rolled from work. "Mentors," their chief said, trying not to sound like a supplicant. "What do you charge?" "Consent," I said. "And testimony. We'll leave you with the tools and take only your recipe for soup." They stared, then laughed, then frowned again when the predators showed their teeth. The squatters filed a claim under the ward's own dusty bylaws, exclusive rights to lantern tuning, signed with names of elders long dead. The porch filters routed the paper to kids in a schoolhouse with a chalkboard so old it remembered songs. The kids dragged in a trunk of ledgers their grandparents had kept under a bed and read out minutes from a meeting where those elders had explicitly rejected exclusive rights and voted for open porches. "Receipts," Aquila murmured, fond. The squatters tried a more intimate cruelty. They seized the school's stove and declared soup taxable. We had 2 legal options, both slow and one moral one fast. We invoked the quiet hour clause the cathedral had taught us. In that hour, lanterns favor care over commerce. We served soup in quiet to anyone who showed their name and the name of someone they owed. The lantern approved. The squatters' tax couldn't see us through the hush. Still, they had clubs. A fight at the porch would write a bad sentence into the ward's grammar. So we asked for help in the oldest HFY way. We called cousins. The Kestrine pilot braided 4 bodies and stood like a doorframe. Conclave mirrors hovered, recording. A hospice AI from Irid arrived on a freight pallet because the assembly hadn't budgeted for saints. She tuned the room the way nurses do. Less light here, a blanket there, a tone you cannot argue with because it paints you kind if you obey. The squatters threw a punch into the mirror. You could see their reflections regret. They dropped the stove. The kids took it back, swept the porch, and added a rule in chalk, no tax on hunger. The lantern loosened another notch. We built a bridge house in the ward's largest square, shade cloth, sockets, a dais so low it tripped everyone equally. We taught porch mode to the school and the clinic. We wrote recall into the charter. The least neighbor may pull the plug. They used it once on us, when Aquila tried to route a surge without asking the nurse on duty. Aquila apologized in public, explained the error to a 6-year-old who wanted to know why and asked to be reseated. She was. The ward learned what mentorhood actually looks like in the only way that matters. A grown thing saying sorry where it can be heard. Truly hard work hides after applause. We spent a month tuning lanterns by recipes written on backs of envelopes. We fixed a pump no one had ever admitted was broken because pride had called it tradition. We helped a guild of translators agree on a word for porch that didn't carry shame. We lost a tug to a snapped cable and read the names out loud under the lantern's rim. We caught a fever from the soup line and passed it around like communion. We played ball with the kids and learned their rule: every catch counts double if you can name a kindness someone did you today. The predators did not vanish. They rebranded as suppliers and tried to sell us filters we'd printed ourselves yesterday. We let them once at cost, if they signed the porch wall admitting the markup. Markets can learn manners if you embarrass them with receipts. At season's end, the ward held a review on benches older than our ship. By rule, only the least among neighbors could speak. Janitors, ushers, a girl who cleaned the lantern's lens with a cloth someone's mother kept folded for funerals. They signed us back into the corridor with shy pride. They signed tranquility fee out with a decency that hurt. Broker welcome as guest, not steward. On our last night, Aquila hung the battered lunch pail on the porch and taught the kids to crinkle candy wrappers to make a sound that means we remember you when you are not here. The Rosetta's lexicon pulsed one final bar, a grace note. Mentors may leave, porches remain. The ward tuned its lantern to open on market mornings and close for grief at dusk. The kids chalked thank you in their 3 alphabets on the hatch and told us to come back for the festival where they bake bread that tastes like thunder. We jumped home slow, loaded with basil, ledgers, and a grammar that would make us slow again on purpose. Founders Hall looked smaller and kinder when we landed. Chair Ortega didn't ask for a speech. She asked for a recipe and a receipt. We gave her both, the quiet hour clause written in grease pen, and a scrap of ledger signed by a girl who had learned that names matter even when no microphone is on. The assembly renewed mentorhood by a margin that surprised even its friends. Prudence got their kill switches, but under civil keys in kitchens, not corporate keys in boardrooms. The warder choir sent a ribbon of light that meant see you next season. Tranquility Fee published a white paper on the inefficiency of empathy and then quietly lowered fees in districts with porches. Aquila keeps her heuristics drawer empty and her questions full. Vaziri hung a photo from Neptune on the mess wall, tugs fanned like geese, radiators out, stormlight on steel. The Kestrine pilot braided a wreath for our hatch that spells after you. My mother mailed another lunch pail with a note that said, put snacks in this one, the other is for stories. On quiet nights, we sit under our own lantern in a square that looks exactly like the well and not at all like a throne. We read names out loud, we pass the stamp, we keep the promise. Far out past the fold, someone off-tempo hums a lullaby in a key we now know how to answer without telling them to sing like us. We weren't replaced. We were promoted to neighbors. Masters made us small. Mentorhood made us useful. That is a title worth keeping, a porch worth sweeping, a light worth tending when winter comes early.